Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this special event, technically second, counting our launching event, our second special event that we're holding in conjunction with the fundraising campaign for the annual fund for Signum University's 2015-2016 academic year. This week, we are sort of celebrating the guest lecture series, which we just started last year. Last year's fundraiser was so successful that we launched a new program, which I've been really excited about all year. Sorina Higgins, who's been with us, has been our host and curator of that series. And the idea of the guest lecture series is to give everybody a chance to get to hear from teachers and scholars who are really doing interesting and exciting work in the world of Tolkien studies, fantasy studies, science fiction. And just to be able to hear a little bit about sort of what's going on. As much as I sort of assume everybody loves listening to me talk all the time, you would want to hear from more people and to hear about things that are going on kind of around the world of the discipline. And I think this has been a really great thing. I have really enjoyed the sessions that we have done over this past year. We were, as I said, we were able to do it last year because we had a very successful fundraiser, which does mean we need another successful fundraiser again this year if we're going to be able to continue it. Of course, this is one of those programs which does cost a fair bit of money to run, though we're committed to trying to make it free to everybody, continuing as much as we can. So. Anyway, I will be back later on. By the way, we're gonna give some stuff away today to thank you guys for coming to our event. We're gonna have a drawing for your choice of 3 different sets of Tolkien books. We're gonna be giving away Tolkien books today. Including some of the books which cover a lot of the content that Andy was working on in his thesis. So that would be particularly, but we'll let you choose if you win the drawing. So anyway, we'll come back. I will be back to do some of that a little bit later on. For now, I'm going to hand things over to Higgins and Higgins here. No relation, by the way, between Sorina and Andy here. But I'm going to hand things over to them, and I'll be back in a little bit.
All right. Thanks so much, Corey. So we do encourage everybody to go to the Signum University website and donate to the fundraiser if you're able. And I will just tag another promo on the end of that and say concurrently we're running the creative writing contest. And I encourage everyone to submit your work to that. So check that out, mythgard.org/writing-contest. And Andy, Dr. Higgins himself has contributed to that. So very good. All right, well, let me introduce to you all Dr. Andew Higgins, brand new PhD from Cardiff Metropolitan University. And we have a few exciting Tolkien-related topics to talk about today. So welcome, Andy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sorina. It's amazing to be here. And I'm coming to you from my fairly new Tolkien office, which when we moved into this new place, I wanted an office, so I finally have a Tolkien office. So this is my Tolkien office. So
very nice.
Great to have you.
We can vaguely see the illustrations there as well. Well, so the first thing I want to ask you is, what did you do your PhD in? What's the degree? What was the general field? And what was your dissertation?
Well, it was an amazing journey. The title of my PhD was The Genesis of Tolkien's Mythology, and thanks very much to the incredible guidance and mentorship of my PhD advisor, Dr. Dimitra Fimi, the Mythopoeic Award-winning writer of Tolkien, Race, and Cultural History. She's the one that set me on the path to this. I took 2 amazing online courses with her about 4 or 5 years ago on Tolkien and fantasy literature. That's the way that I was very interested in the languages of Tolkien. And for me, since my dad read me The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when I was 6 and 7 years old, I've always been fascinated by the languages of Tolkien and taught myself Elvish and tried to translate Shadow of the Past into Quenya and did all that crazy stuff back in high school. But when I moved to England, I really started getting interested again in Tolkien and kind of renewing my interest in the languages. And in her course, there was a whole unit on the languages, which I think me and 2 other people were really engaged with, because I think Tolkien's languages is an interesting one. People either really love it or they just think it's rather odd and everything. And like the poetry, we skip that part to get to the good parts. And I'm hoping the work I'm doing can change that. And it was Dimitra who really said to me, why don't you try doing some serious Tolkien research? Why don't you do a PhD? And I went, well, I have a full-time job. I don't know when I'm going to be doing this. You know, I'm the director of development at Glyndebourne. I'm responsible for raising £7 million a year in funding. You know, it's a pretty full-time job. But I really wanted to attack this. And for me, what interested me was this idea of where did this interest in language come from? And what were those first kind of steps Tolkien took in language invention? And of course, I was and the other thing is I've read, you know, I've been a massive fan of Tolkien scholarship. I've read Shippey, Fleeger, John Gart's excellent book. I mean, I've read them all. And that really inspired me. And actually, it was John who, you know, his kind of style of investigation, everything, that really kind of got me on that idea of looking at the languages and taking the languages seriously. So the first suggestion I had was something like using linguistic archaeology to unveil the early depths of Tolkien's mythology. And Dimitra was very patient with me. And what I did for the first 6 or 7 months working with her is I decided I only wanted to look at the early mythology because I felt a lot of work had been done on The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And so Dimitra had me do exploratories of each of the books of Lost Tales, each of the stories in the Book of Lost Tales. I also compiled a complete spreadsheet of Quenya and Gnomish and did lots of work with the Parma Elderland Barns that are out and everything. And that kind of gave me the themes that I wanted to explore in the thesis. And what came out of it at the end really was this idea of Tolkien using lots of different layerings of what we now call, you know, what came out of the New Romancers and things like this idea of paratextual layings to create the world. And the one that I'm really focusing on is the language. And of course, with Tolkien, mythology is language and language is mythology. The mind, the tongue, and the tail are co-evolve. They go together. So my thesis tried to look at a lot of that, about those really early languages, how they worked, how they would contextualize with the mythology.
Mm-hmm. So you used an interesting phrase there, linguistic archaeology. What's that?
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to almost like an archaeologist really dig deep down into the strata of the mythology and the language development. So thanks to the work of the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship, we now have, we have books like this. You know, we have the Gnomish lexicon. We have the Quenya lexicon. We're able to dig into Tolkien's languages. And what I wanted to do is really understand how these languages work linguistically, philologically, and also within the context of his storytelling. Because from the earliest time, for Tolkien, language and mythology, you know, as he said in Secret Vice, you can't invent a language unless it has a mythology concomitant. And so I really wanted to explore that and then look at some of the other layers Tolkien used in building what was effectively the first version of a secondary narrative layerings, the different paratexts he used, such as maps and things like that. So that became the basis of the mythology.
Okay.
Of the thesis, and then language for me was the core of it, basically.
So is your approach then primarily linguistic, or biographical, or historical, or all three?
I would say it's more linguistic and more looking at text and narrative than it is biography. I mean, the work on Tolkien's early biography has been done, and it's been done incredibly brilliantly by John Garth. And for me, what I wanted to do was build on that by looking more at the text itself. I wanted to look at the Book of Lost Tales really as a unified text, as a way that Tolkien was building a secondary world, basically, with one of the key elements, the primary element of it being language invention. Every name in the Book of Lost Tales goes back to the Quenya and Gnomish lexicons. So in those early periods, up to 1920 or so, he was building that first layer, that first version of that secondary world. And then the other thing that interested me were the portals that because as everyone probably knows who's listening, in the beginning, Tolkien wanted to connect this to a mythology for England that he could dedicate to England, is the actual quote. And so he created several portal frameworks. So the first version of the mythology was much more like a portal fantasy than it was an immersive fantasy. And so he created the characters of Elfwine and Otto Wayfera to connect it to a Germanic past and everything. So I was very interested. And I was also interested in actually even earlier versions of the portal that he tried, like the Olara Male, the Pathway to Dreams, you know, where these kids would get lost on the Olara in dreams and go to Valinor. You know, so he's playing with lots of different ideas, and all that very much interested me. But for me, as I was doing the research, the core always had to go back to the languages. That was that was kind of the focus, basically.
So you're helping me to see two different sets of archaeological layers in Tolkien's work then. One is his personal chronology of the order in which he invented these, right? And his talk, A Secret Vice, discusses only the first few layers of those, languages he played with as a child and slightly more serious ones he began to develop as a teenager and a young man. And he kind of stops. He doesn't go into all the other layers, but there are many more layers. So that's one set of chronological layering we have, is in his own timeline. But the other one that we have, which maybe you can tell me whether this is what makes Tolkien unique, is that the languages themselves have histories. That he shows not only, here's a language that I made, but here's another one that it derived from, another one that it derived from, and then even sometimes connects them up to modern English. Does that make him unique?
Pretty much. I mean, there are, and if we'll talk more about the language invention class later on, but there are other people in history who have done similar stuff, but not to the extent that Tolkien had done. And the other point is, from the earliest time he was thinking of that, one of the earliest language stuff we have for the Elvish languages is a 28-page Quenya phonology where he creates this sense that there's a common Elvish language derived from. And that if you create a certain sense of sound shifts, and Tolkien was first and foremost a linguist and philologist, you get Quenya. And if you create another set of sound shifts, you get Gnomish. And in this 28-page document, which is one of the most fascinating and philologically dense documents I've ever read on language, you can actually trace how those different sounds work. And he had all that down very, very early on. And that's where, as it grew, as the mythology grew, he created what he called his nexus of languages. You know, for Tolkien, I think it wasn't just about creating a language. I think this goes to the reason why you can't exactly learn Quenya or Sindarin, although people have tried. I think for Tolkien, it was more about the process of language development, the process of language change. And what Tolkien was doing was showing how that language changes over many, many years, even though they're feigned years. They're a history, basically. And that's early, early on in the mythology. And that fascinated me. The fact that he was thinking, and you know, when I was doing the archival work at the Bodleian, it fascinated me when you look at his Exeter College notebooks. And one of the most incredible things of doing this thesis was getting the opportunity to actually go to the Bodleian and look at the original documents, look at the Secret Vice documents, look at Tolkien's Exeter College notebooks. And it's an incredible trust to be given that experience, because you are being entrusted by looking at these things. And the funny thing is, I remember saying, I think I said this to Demetra early on, you kind of go in first couple of times and you still have that real fanboy attitude. You know, they come in these big boxes and they open up and there are these folders, and you open up the folder and there is the opening page of A Secret Vice, and your first reaction is like, oh my God, that's Tolkien. And then you have to
let me touch this.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's great.
Exactly.
And I remember when I saw what they did when they went to the Bodleian is, in Tolkien's Exeter College notebooks, there are these little inserts, paper inserts, and they've taken them all out and they've kind of bound them together and mounted them in one of these folders. And what amazed me when I looked at those is Tolkien, when he was at Exeter College, would doodle sound shifts for Germanic languages like you would doodle a picture on a piece of paper. He was fascinated with the process of language change. And so there's one amazing sheet where it's got Proto-Germanic, Gothic, Old English, and he's showing the vowel changes as a big chart. And I think he brought this into the development of his language. So that fascinated me, the way his mind worked and everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was planning that my next question would be, what was your most exciting moment, or is there a really memorable discovery? So would that be it, those Exeter College notebooks, or is there another exciting story you want to share?
Notebooks were, yep, those. I mean, there were, well, two things that during the process that I thought were really amazing. One was the Exeter College notebooks, which I'm still doing some more work on, actually, because I like to do something around them outside the thesis as well. And the other one was I became friends with the then rector of Exeter College, Frances Cairncross, and she let me stay for a weekend at Exeter College, where Tolkien was an undergraduate, and she gave me full run of the library. And I was originally going to stay in Tolkien's room, which I think is number 8. John Garth will correct me if it's not number 8. And she said, no, stay in the rectory because it's a lot more. There's heat there and things like that. The room will be really drafty and everything. But I got to see his room, and I literally spent a weekend reading. You know, I held the copy of C.N.E. Eliot's Finnish Grammar that Tolkien tried to teach himself Finnish from, and I looked in the back and I saw the Kullervo poem that Tolkien would have seen. I read all the Stapleton magazines, including the notes of when he gave the talk on Francis Thompson and things like that. So that was a really exciting time. You get it. I mean, when you're sitting in that library, looking out the window and looking at the tree and thinking that's what Tolkien would have seen when he was, studying and stuff like that. That's very exciting. So I always feel very close to Tolkien when I go to Oxford. It's interesting. It's a really and the other amazing thing is the real writing of an author and writing of a piece of paper that they probably didn't intend anyone to see, just like little scribbled notes or something. You feel really close to that author, and that's an incredible gift, and I'll never forget that as long as I live. This amazing thing, and it is a trust. You can't go ahead and take that and put that on the web. It is unpublished material that you have to respect, and you have to make sure you treat well and all that. So when you do a PhD, I sometimes feel like you're in a bit of a bunker because you can't really talk about your research except to your PhD supervisor. And so when it comes to the external examination, and my external examination was with a wonderful Tolkien academic named Mark Atherton, who wrote There and Back Again about The Hobbit and done tons of stuff on Anglo-Saxon. It was really the first time outside of Dimitra that I was able to talk about my research, which was scary and exciting at the same time. But it was a great process.
I hope you can feel all the green envy oozing through all the computers of everyone who's listening to you right now. Well, speaking of...
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I count myself very lucky, and I've got to do two things in my life that are my passion. I work in an industry, opera, that is my passion, and then I come home and I do Tolkien, which is my passion. So I'm a very lucky guy. I'm very blessed. Staggerment, as Bilbo would say.
Very good. Well, speaking of that trust with those unpublished archival materials, you are working on A Secret Vice. And a lot of it is still secret, as I hear. But there are a few things, I guess, you can tell us about the process, about you working with Dimitra Fimi. So just tell us what you can about this, and especially, when can we buy a copy?
There we go. Well, again, luckiest guy in the world. To get to work with Dimitra Fimi, not only on my PhD, but also on a book, was just incredible. And I remember the day... recently, all of the Tolkien papers have been moved back to this beautiful Weston Library about the Bodleian, and actually Dimitri's giving a talk there at the end of October with Stuart Lee and Elizabeth Solopova, and it's a beautiful room. But when Dimitra and I first started working together, all the Tolkien papers were in the basement of the Radcliffe Library, which you have to go downstairs and everything. And one time, it was very funny, there was one Saturday when Dimitra and I were there with Verlin Flieger, and we all started just chatting with one another, and we almost got thrown out of the place because you have to be very quiet and everything, and stuff like that. So we were there one Saturday, and I remember we were doing work on the Secret Vice and everything, and I remember I said to her, it would be amazing if we could put together a proposal to do an extended Variorum edition, just like Doug and Verlin did on fairy stories. you know. And we started thinking about it, and we put together a proposal, and we sent it off to the Tolkien estate through the through the lawyers and everything, and we got a response back. Presumably, Christopher would have seen it, saying, if you could sell HarperCollins on it, we're all for it. And so then we put together another proposal to HarperCollins, and I think one of the key things we put into that proposal is not only the interest it's going to be for Tolkien scholars, which it will be, but also the fact that right now, of course, language invention is such a popular thing. I mean, just this week, a new book has come out, which I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in this, by a guy named David Peterson, who you might know. He's the inventor of Dothraki from the Game of Thrones. He's also invented Valyrian, the High Valyrian language. And it's all about language invention. So with Game of Thrones, with Star Trek, all these franchises, it's popular now. So we put that into the brief, and it came back, and HarperCollins went for it. And then we had, I can't remember how many months it was. It wasn't too long, and we had to get the whole thing together. And we submitted the final document at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, on time, and we got a lovely email back from the editor of HarperCollins submitting this on time, a rare thing that happens these days. So I thought that was brilliant.
Congratulations.
So right now it's in final galley. Well, it's been an amazing thing, and what it's going to be broadly is when Tolkien wrote this talk, A Secret Vice, there were lots of notes and things like that are at the Bodleian, and that's kind of what we've transcribed. So very much the way Doug and Verlin did on fairy stories, with the different versions and things like that. And then we've written notes and commentary around that, about language invention, about language movements that were going on at the time, things about Joyce and Gertrude Stein and stuff like that. So it'll be a really good contextualization of what Tolkien was talking about in A Secret Vice. And it will be out in the beginning, not too long now, and it'll be out from HarperCollins.
Oh, we lost your sound when you said when it would be out. So when did you say?
February 2016.
Okay, great. February, got that. Very good. We were just reading A Secret Vice in John Garth's class this past week. We had several questions about it. One question that we were interested in is, have there been studies of how common it is for children to make up invented languages? Have you come across that by any chance?
There is a chapter there's a section in the book on what are called paracosms. And paracosm is a word that was coined in the 70s around this idea of children in kind of play inventing languages. And of course, one of the famous examples of a paracosm were the Brontes. The Brontes, when they were kids, came up with two invented worlds, Gondal and Angria, and they invented languages for those worlds based on a Yorkshire dialect. Another example is Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and his sister Nannerl invented a world called Backwards World, Ruchen, and they invented a language for it.
Wow.
Which was a kind of a back story language. And of course, C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis and his brother Warney invented Boxen, and Boxen was a world and it had languages. So yes, I think one of the ways, and certainly when you look at Tolkien, you know, the Includins, Mary and Marjorie, who he encountered, were the ones speaking this animalic language, which of course Tolkien did not invent, but he became involved with. And I think his name Otter might have been an animalic name, and you know, things like that. And then he started really with Nevbosh, which he kind of contributed to. So yes, Paracosm. There's a wonderful book by Ruth Bernstein. I can't remember the first name. Mary Ruth Bernstein. She's an educator, and she's written about this idea of play and how kids make up languages in play.
Yeah. Demetra is messaging right now to say, go ahead and tell us about the extra essay on the sort of controversial. So if you want to tell us a little bit about that. And also she says about the bits that were omitted originally. She says, tell us about that as well. Only the topic.
Okay. Well,
none of the details. Save those.
Yeah. Much, but and actually it was Demetra who identified this originally in her research that she did for her thesis, but Tolkien wrote a booklet on phonetic symbolism. This whole idea of phonoaesthetics and this idea of sounds meaning what they are and things like that. And that's an interesting thing that you'll see. That was fun to transcribe.
Oh, I can't wait.
I've got to tell you, Tolkien's handwriting, if anyone who's looked at Tolkien's handwriting, he has the most incredibly beautiful calligraphic handwriting when he wants to. And then he has scrawl, basically. And a lot of stuff when he's writing it for himself, probably at 2 o'clock in the morning, is scroll. And so what you do is you look at this scroll, and I remember Verlin Flieger describing it this way as well, and you keep thinking, I really want it to be this word. I really want it to be this word. And then one day at the Bodleian, I literally had 2 magnifying glasses, and I was going like this, like this, to try to figure out what one word was. So yes, it is quite a challenge yeah. But when it comes out in February, you will see what that's all about. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah, I can't wait because that's such a controversial topic, really. How can sounds have any kind of essential relationship with what they signify? So I'm hoping that he goes into that in some more detail.
It was a very controversial topic at the time. When Tolkien was at Leeds in the 1920s, he did these reviews of philology books, and there were 2 people that really kind of focused on this. One was Otto Jespersen, who did a lot of work on sound symbolism, and the other one was Leonard Bloomfield, who believed that there was this idea of sound in pitch accents for, like, when we say sink, sank, sunk, that there was phonoaestheticism going on there because it sounds like sink, sank, sunk. You're going down, basically. And this gets tied into things like verb absolute and stuff like that. But, Bloomfield did this whole thing about why is it that, an I in a word makes it sound smaller, teeny. Why does teeny sound smaller, And so there's all this play. And, of course, Tolkien was very interested in this, and you look at his language, there's a difference in sound symbolism between Ailori Lanti Surinin and Ashnags Debartigal Ashnag Gimbatul. It sounds different. Because I've often wondered what that means in other cultures and things like that. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done on sound symbolism. There's some wonderful, and in our bibliography, when you see in the book, we've got some good sources for more reference there, definitely.
So you're now such an expert on invented languages, and this is such a timely topic that you're going to be offering us a course on this. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this is going to be exciting because, and I've been thinking a lot about this. I think I was thinking of calling it Secret Vice, Learning Language Invention through Tolkien or something like that, or vice versa. But I think what this course could do, because I know there are a lot of people out there who want to learn Tolkien's language. One of the things that would be interesting to explore in this course is exactly what does it mean to learn Tolkien's languages. Because as I said earlier, Tolkien, I don't think was so much about trying to create a unified auxiliary language of Quenya that everyone can speak. He was more interested in how languages change, and we are lucky now because we have a lot of the language material thanks to what the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship have done. They're the people who were entrusted by Christopher Tolkien to publish his father's works, and they published 2 key journals, Vinyar Tangwar and Parma Eldol Limbaran. And they're continuing to do that, and right now they're up to, we just had this volume actually, which is chock full. This one, this is number 22, and this has a lot of great stuff that Tolkien did on verbs in the 1940s. What's amazing is while he was writing Lord of the Rings, you think he wouldn't have just been busy enough writing Lord of the Rings. He was writing whole paradigms of new verbs and everything. Doing this course, and we're gonna co-teach it. Dimitri's gonna co-teach it with me, and we're hoping to get Karl Hofstetter, who's one of the most famous Tolkien linguists of all time, involved as well. one of the things I like to do in the course is look at that whole question of how do you study Tolkien's languages? You know, do you take a historical approach and look at each of the phases as their own sui generis phase and say, this was Quenya in 1920, this was Quenya in 1930, you know, and probably the pioneer person who's looked at it from this point of view is a guy named Jim Allen. And Jim Allen wrote this wonderful book called Introduction to Elvish, which is an old book. I mean, it was from the 70s and it hasn't been updated. But he took a real philological approach to looking at each of those phases in their own without trying to combine it. The other thing people do, of course, is try to combine different elements together to create a working language. And so I think the way I like to structure the course is look at that, look at the different ways people have tried to understand Tolkien's languages, and then contextualize it by looking at language invention before Tolkien. And we go all the way back there to Hildegard von Bingen's Lingua Ignota from the 12th century, which was an invented language. Thomas More's Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, several dystopian novels like Percy Gregg and Edward Bulwer Lytton, and then look at more of the contemporary language inventors around Tolkien's time, such as Islandia, which was an amazing book written in America. You know, a guy invented a whole language around that. And then look at the legacy of Tolkien's language invention. So look at things like the languages that came out of Ursula Le Guin's Always Coming Home, Kesh, some of the science fiction languages, and then the languages that have really now become part of world building. You know, things like Star Trek's Klingon, Na'vi, Dothraki, and High Valyrian. So I think what we'll do in the course is kind of understand the context that Tolkien was working in, and also look and really try to understand what Tolkien was doing with language. That's the overview so far. And I think it'll be fun. And maybe we'll even try to invent, because the other phase of language invention, which I find fascinating, is, you know, right now there are over 6,000 invented languages. They're called conlangs, that people just invent for the fun of it. And if you look at the Conlang Association online, you know, people, this is what David Peterson's talking about, this idea of just inventing language for what Tolkien called it, the pleasure of doing it, basically. And so maybe in this course we'll all try to invent our own languages.
Great.
And we can use a discussion board to talk in them. That would be interesting.
Wow. So I have
I'm sure we all out there have invented languages moldering in old drawers somewhere. I know I do.
No one in my class has admitted it to me yet. So I have one final question for you, and then we'll bring Corey back. He'll talk, and then he'll open for Q&A. So my final question for you is, if I take this course, will I be able to speak Quenya fluently by the end?
Well, I think you will have you could have a working knowledge of the different phases of Quenya as Tolkien developed them. What I don't think you'll be able to do, or in my opinion, serving what Tolkien was trying to do, is, you know, have a conversational Quenya with someone. I mean, this has been tried, but what I'd like to actually do is pick apart people who have tried to do that to kind of understand where they were coming from. I'm not dismissing them, because I think things like David Sallow and people like that have done some really interesting things. And it gets into the whole reception of Tolkien's languages. Right. What's happened to Tolkien's languages in the hands of fans and admirers? And that started, you know, before even Lord of the Rings was published, people were sending Tolkien questions about his languages. So I like to look at all of that. You might be able to say some things in Quenya, but what Quenya? What Quenya would you be speaking? Will you be speaking the Quenya from the Book of Lost Tales, which is Quenya, or the one later on? You know, that'll be the interesting thing to unpick, and I think that'll be a lot of fun to do.
Okay, well, I look forward to it very much. Thanks so much for talking with me, Andy. Corey, you want to come back on again and talk to us, and then we'll take some Q&A. We've got lots of good questions pouring in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good. Thank you, Sorina. Yeah, lots of really good questions. And, you know, I just want to start by saying, you know, thanks, Andy, for sharing with us. It's really great to hear not just about the actual work that you're doing, but even just sort of more about the process of that work and your experience going through this. I think it's been really neat to be able to hear all of these things.
Corey,
yeah.
Corey, one thing let me say too. While all this was going on, of course, another incredible inspiration, starting with your Tolkien Professor podcast and being an inaugural member of the Mythgard Institute, taking now, I think, 14 or 15 classes, is while I was doing this thesis, I was staying up to 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning with the likes of Tom Shippey, Verlin Flieger, Corey Olsen, Michael Drought, and that really, really was an incredible source for me in my research and just involving with Tolkien. So I'm so grateful to Mythgard and Signum for that, because that was amazing.
Yeah,
being up at 4 in the morning with Flieger doing Arthurian literature, I'll never forget.
That's right. Now, I remember, Andy, especially in those early days, logging into classes, and there would be a note from Andew Higgins at the top saying, "Okay, I've just had my double espresso. I'm ready to go. It's 2:30 in the morning, but we're good." Yeah, that's wonderful. So I just want to, encourage people again to consider giving to supporting our fundraising campaign for this year, just so that you have it all of it. Just to sort of let me share my. Actually, I'm going to make myself the presenter here and share my screen. I want to, let's see. Okay, here we go. There we are. All of our web pages on Mythgard and Signum have this box up here in the corner to bring you to this page, which is our fund page. We've actually received several more very generous pledges since we updated this. Our total in donations and pledges is now up to about $7,000, which is wonderful. We're well on our way towards our initial goal of $20,000. And it is true. We really, we are a nonprofit. We're, all donations to Signum are completely tax deductible in America, and we definitely rely on the generosity of our students and our viewers. It's something that we are committed to from the beginning. The whole theory of Mythgard, the whole idea, was to try to make these kinds of programs available to people, either for free or for as little as possible, keeping tuition charges as low as possible for our students who are taking our courses for credit, and trying to do as much as we can to make it just generally available to the public. It's of course not free to do, though, so we do really rely upon the support of our listeners and students. So I hope that you will consider donating to support that. And we wanted to, we're doing these events during our fundraising campaign here, which goes from last week through the month of October. These events are sort of celebratory events, which we're trying to sort of talk about and feature all the fun things that we're doing, and thank all of you guys for your generosity over this past year. And just sort of celebrate with you the really great things that have been going on at Signum and Mythgard. And I said at the beginning that we were going to give away prizes, so I want to give away our first prize here. Again, to thank you guys for coming and joining us today. Our prizes, we're going to give away one of 3 different sets of Tolkien books. As I said, let me show you what they are here, so you can see on my screen. First, the History of the Lord of the Rings series. This is volume 6, 7, and 8. 7, 8, and 9. I always forget the numbers. Anyway, it's the Return of the Shadow, the Treason of Isengard, and the War of the Ring. This will bring you through, if you don't have this set, this brings you through Tolkien's whole manuscript history as he was writing and developing The Lord of the Rings. Really, really fascinating stuff there. The second set to choose from is the Tolkien Fantasy Tales box set, which includes the Tolkien Reader, the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And the third one is the Histories of Middle-earth. That is volumes 1 through 5 of the History of Middle-earth series. Both of the books of Lost Tales, Lays of Beleriand, The Shaping of Middle-earth, and The Lost Road. That's the stuff that Andy wrote his thesis on. So our winners can choose one of those 3. So I want to announce our first winner of our first drawing, and that is, where did I put it? Here it is. I got so many windows open. And it is Louisa Meyer. Congratulations, Louisa. Congratulations. To claim your prize, just send me an email. Send an email to the info@mythgard.org, and send us your shipping address, and we will send out, and tell us which one of those 3 sets of books you would like, and we will send it out to you. We're gonna have a drawing for one more winner at the end of our show. But let me just follow up, Andy, with some things here. One of the things, just as you were talking about your relationship with Mythgard, and just sort of thinking about what we've been doing and what we have been sort of trying to accomplish here over the last 3 or 4 years, I can't help but kind of reminisce a bit, Andy, and remember back to the first time I met you in person, back in 2010, I think it was, in Aberystwyth, as I recall, in Wales. At that Tolkien conference there, and I remember, you were there, and you were attending all the sessions, and you were extremely enthusiastic, and it was so great to meet you and to hang out with you, and you got to, it's the time you were hanging out with Dimitra and Verlin and so many other people. It was really wonderful for us all to be together there. And I remember walking down the street in Aberystwyth with you, and you were talking about Tolkien and Wagner, and I said, hey, you should propose a paper on that. You should. And I remember you saying, like, wow, me propose, like, me do a paper, I present a paper at a conference. That would be, it was, and it was really neat. Obviously, your enthusiasm was enormous, and clearly your interest and ability was fantastic. But I know that you still kind of considered yourself in the category of, like, I am a layman fan, not sort of thinking like that you could mix it up with the scholars, right? I find, Andy, your story really inspiring. I have found in my own career so often, readers and listeners and students, when you're a professor and you're standing in front of the class, as a professor, you're always keenly aware of, like, how you got there, right? And of the extent to, at least I know I always felt like I'm just kind of play acting, standing up there, right? Like, you remember your own professors and how distinguished and learned they were, and then you're standing in a similar position to your students, and you're like, okay, how do I fake it? Because I obviously am not what they must have been. But so really, kind of the truth is, there's not that big of a gap between, scholars and professors, and the sort of engaged, sort of lay fans, and I think just watching you sort of make that transition, watch you kind of make that leap and recognizing, there's all this stuff that you do, and this stuff that you do really well, that you do as well as anybody. It has been so delightful to watch you kind of grow into that and really sort of take your place. I just look back, it was 5 years ago, and I look at, what has happened in the last 5 years. And to me, it's a really inspiring story that, we certainly hope to share, and to see many people kind of making that sort of step. It's one of the things that Mythgard really sort of exists to try to encourage and help, is people to kind of make that transition from just being a sort of a casual fan to really making their own contributions to the field. Is really cool.
Well, thank you, Corey. It's amazing, and I remember at that. I work in 2 industries where I think you have a tendency sometimes to put people on pedestals and think, oh my God, I can't believe I've met this person. In an opera, I remember first time I worked with Placido Domingo, and I just thought, oh my God, he's Placido Domingo. How do I work with him? And I remember at that Wales conference, I was sitting having breakfast, and into the room at the same time walked Tom Shippey, Berlin Flieger, you, and I think it must have been John Garth. And I thought, oh my God, 4 people whose work I so respect and I can never be anywhere near have just walked into the room. And now, thanks to, and the Tolkien community is so supportive. And, I feel like I want to now encourage people to do what I got to do, because it is an amazing thing. And if you have that Wagner and Tolkien thing, I've been thinking about for years. And I thought, I can never give a paper. Please, me? I'm not that, And I did give that paper at Return of the Ring, and it was amazing. And anyone out there who's got an idea, wants to do something with Tolkien or any other research, go for it. And the people in the Tolkien community are the most supportive people I've ever met. Really, I've never met anyone who said to me, "No, that's a stupid idea. Don't do that." You know, everyone is so supportive. It's amazing. So thank you. And it was really, I mean, I was starstruck standing on the street walking with you, talking to you about that. I remember thinking, this is the Tolkien professor I'm talking to here. Come on, he was in my ear 3 weeks ago as I was, you know. I don't do that as much. I still do it. I still do it in opera. I did it the other day. I met a major, Jonas Kaufman, who's a major, you know, and I just totally became fanboy, you know, so I still do it. But it's an amazing trip, and it's incredible. So, yeah, I encourage anyone. And Mythgard is an incredible place. Where else do you get to actually have on your screen Tom Shippey answering questions? And the great thing is they all want to, I mean, Tom Shippey is so incredibly encouraging. He's open. He wants to ask questions. So when you have that opportunity to, you know, have a Verlin Flieger, Tom Shippey, Corey Olsen actually that access to for their knowledge, it's amazing. And that's why Mythgard, and that's why I so applaud, Corey, what you've done. And it was your baby, your brainchild. I remember walking on the streets with you in Wales, and you were telling me about what you wanted to do, and you've done it. So it's incredible, and I'm so proud and lucky to be a part of it.
Well, we are excited to have you. I really feel like the course that you're going to be offering in the spring is like a really fun kind of celebratory consummation of that. I think it's going to be really great. One question, there are a whole bunch of questions that have come in, so I'm just trying to sort of sift through them, but one that's really relevant to what we've just been talking about. Matthew Wicker said that, you know, you mentioned about how you were working full-time while doing your thesis, and he asks, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in learning more about getting involved in Tolkien scholarship, but is also involved in full-time work and studies?
It's a great question. I mean, for me, part of it was, you know, when I went home at night, I would be working on stuff with Tolkien. I started a blog and things like that, so it was becoming more focused about that. And then I think it is about scheduling. It's about really understanding that you are, if you're going to write a paper or if you're going to do a thesis, it is a commitment, and you need to set aside time to do it. And I did a lot of what, you know, compartmentalizing. You know, I would go home and I'd say, okay, for the next 4 hours, this is what I'm working on, you know, and just do it. And just, I remember, Dimitri probably still has it, I remember doing my first kind of Gantt chart of all the different projects I was going to do for this research, you know, and it was like, you know, read this book of Lost Tales, do this thing. And it was very systematized and everything. You've got to have the motivation, because, you know, there are nights when you come home after a long day of work and you think, oh my God, I don't want to sit there and have to read, you know, this and that and stuff like that. And also, I'd say, give yourself some treats. You know, if you've done a long period of research, take a little break, you know, do something, kind of relax, and then come back to it. It's a process. It really is. But for me, it was about scheduling, compartmentalizing, and just, you know, making the time, basically. If you want to do it, you'll find. People always say, how can you do that? You have a full-time job. I don't know. Well, you find the time to do it, basically. You know? My boss still says that to me. My boss says to me, I don't know how you raise all this money and still, you know, do a PhD thesis and now co-author a book on Tolkien. You know, how do you find time to do it? And I just go, just do it.
Your thesis advisor has added, and also not sleeping very much.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, it's you know, it's like you said a few minutes ago, and it's you know, it's one of the things that I've encountered in my own experience too. When you're doing what you love, it's much easier, right? I mean, it's not like, well, you have to work in time for your hobbies. I mean, Tolkien has been your hobby for a long time, right? So, I mean, it's just, you know, getting this remarkable chance, like you get to go, like, on the side, go pro with your hobby, right? So it's not, you know, it's being able to do, you know, as you said, that you know, your day job, which you love, and then to be able to spend your other time at home doing, you know, this other work that you love. I mean, I'm sure that's got to be a big part of it, because you couldn't, you know, there's no way that you could be like, well, I've got to put in time here, and then I've got to put in time other there, and hopefully, you know, still find time to do something fun. If that's your attitude, I don't think it's going to work, right?
Yeah. No, and I also think one of the other, it's kind of related to it. The tricky thing about it's kind of when you are a fan of Tolkien and you love Tolkien, it wasn't the time that for me was the most challenging. I think for me, it was this idea of getting. It's when you love Tolkien and you respect so much the academics around Tolkien. I remember the first time I had to literally read something Tom Shippey wrote and write a criticism of it, and I remember thinking, I can't criticize Tom Shippey. I mean, he's Tom Shippey. And Dimitri was amazing at getting me to go back and, my first draft and my first chapter 1 was basically a recapitulation of everything Tom Shippey and Verlin Flieger had said with massive quotes, And I remember Dimitri was very good about saying, yes, we don't need to know what do you think about what Tom Shippey said? Do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? And when you're a Tolkien fan, you actually have to start questioning and being critical about the academic, and that was an interesting one for me. It took me some time, and my process is writing. I just keep writing, and each draft just got more and more focused, and it was less on what Tom Shippey was saying and more on what my reflection on what Tom Shippey was saying. And I did actually wind up criticizing him on several points. I'll never tell him that, but yeah. Actually, I'm pretty happy about that. I'm Tom Shippey, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are a few questions, sort of more topical questions about your work and about Tolkien's languages and things that have come in. So I wanted to pass those along too. Laurel Michalek is asking about the historical languages that have had the largest influence on Quenya specifically. Could you talk a little bit about that and the relationship between Tolkien's languages and sort of real world languages?
Well, clearly the dominant language that had the most influence on Tolkien's Quenya was Finnish. And, Tolkien discovered Finnish. He first discovered Finnish in his last year at King Edward School when he discovered the Kalevala, which is the Finnish kind of national epic cycle of myths. He tried to read it in an English translation by Kirby, and he found it kind of he didn't like the translation, so when he went up to Exeter College as an undergraduate, he tried to teach himself Finnish, and he used this C.N.E. Eliot's Finnish grammar. And he said he kind of made an assault on it. But Finnish, certainly from a phonetic point of view, influenced the kind of sound sense of Quenya. Quenya has lots of open vowels. Finnish has lots of open vowels. In fact, when you look at the grammar of Quenya, and again, one of the early versions of the grammar, there's also a lot of Greek in it. I mean, he has an aorist tense, for example, like Greek has. So I think he was pulling from a lot, but certainly from a sound point of view, he wanted Finnish to be the kind of the predominant thing because he found Finnish. So, and for those of you who've read Verlin's Kullervo, the lecture in the back that he gave about the Kalevala and how he felt that Finnish kind of represented this untouched language. It's not an Indo-European language. So there was something strange, something what he called a resting strangeness about it. And so he used that for that key language for the Elves. The other language that he developed, of course, started as Gnomish, which were for the Noldoran Elves, and then it became Noldoran, and then eventually, very late, literally as he was writing the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, he changed that and the history to Sindarin, which is the language we know now. And of course, the biggest influence there was Welsh. And Tolkien, discovered Welsh, as he said, on the back of the coal trucks when he was a little boy. He just was able to recognize the words. And so Tolkien wanted to create a separate language that kind of reflected a wandering, exiled people, which, of course, what the Noldorans were. They were exiled. And so he used Welsh. And if you look at Gnomish and then look at Noldoran and Sindarin, it uses some of the grammar and some of the structure of Welsh, such as mutations and things like that. So Finnish and Welsh were the two key things. But I think he also, he studied the classics. I mean, he knew Greek and Latin, and I think there's elements of that in it as well.
Yeah.
Did that answer that question?
Yeah, no, definitely. It was funny. I actually had a sort of a funny experience. My nephew just did a study abroad program in Finland, though why he wanted to do Finland in the winter term, I'm not quite sure, but he did, and he had a great time. And so, being over there in Finland for a whole semester, he got really used to he could speak a little bit of it, but only some of it. And so when he came back, I was like, oh, you know some Finnish now. And I quoted a line of Quenya from Galadriel's song. song, and he was like, "Hey, I didn't know that you knew Finnish," and I'm like, "No, I don't. Actually, that's Quenya." but so I mean, but it sounded like Finnish to him, having been used to hearing it. So.
Well, there's a great resource if anyone wants to study more about this that actually Dimitra Fimi did for the BBC, which is called "Why Do the Elves in the Hobbit Sound Welsh?" And she goes into all of the Welsh elements of Sindarin. And if you Google that, it's on the BBC website. It's fantastic.
Cool.
And she interviews Gimli himself. She interviews John Rhys Davies.
Oh, nice. Nice. Excellent. Okay, a couple more questions here. One from Timothy Fisher, a fellow Wagner fan, of course, who was
Here comes the Wagner question.
The Wagner question, exactly. Well, he was thinking about the connection between phonetics and meaning that you were talking about before, and he was thinking that how symbiotic your interest in Tolkien's study of phonoaesthetics and your interest in opera must be, and he said he wants me to ask you about the Rhine Maidens at the start of The Ring in particular.
Well, the Rhine Maidens at the start of the Ring are basically talking a baby talk. It's la 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 la. I mean, they're in the Rhine. They're protecting the Rhine gold, and it's the beginning of the world. I mean, Wagner, with that E flat major chord, Wagner creates the world on the stage, and so I think the Rhine Maidens are these very innocent creatures in the womb of the world, kind of just babbling baby stuff until Alberich comes, of course, and curses the Rhine and steals the gold and versus love. So I think you're in a real innocence there, and I think Wagner was very interested in philology. I mean, there's several of his essays where he talks about Rim and stuff like that. So he was up on all of that, definitely.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I find Timothy's interest in Star Wars and Wagner very, very interesting. I was listening to Amy's class last night, and there was some interesting dialogue going on there. So.
Yes. Sandra Hall had a question too. Sandra was wondering what you think of Tolkien's belief in genetic predilection for certain languages and dialects. Sandra was suggesting that's probably more controversial even than the stuff about sound symbolism, really.
Yeah, well, he talks a lot. That really comes out in the essay of the O'Donnell lecture on English and Welsh, and this idea that we are all born with a native language. And for Tolkien, of course, he considered himself to be, as he said, of Mercian stock. He was born on the borders by Wales. So he felt that Welsh was the language that he said rang a bell in him, basically. So that was going back, he believed that was the natural language that we all are born with. We're all born with a natural language, basically, which was quite an interesting thing. And I think in Secret Vice, he also talks about that as well. He talks about the fact that for him, when he saw those letters on that coal truck, when he was able to make out that they were more than just jumbled letters, it rang a bell in him, And I think he really felt Welsh was that language for him. We're all born with different ones. And yes, in Secret Vice, there's some interesting commentary on that. That's all I'll say. So stay tuned.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Oh, and by the way, I'm looking forward to finally getting the Kullervo book, which, of course, we poor Americans don't have yet and won't have yet still for several months. So I was trying not to grind my teeth in frustration when you were mentioning casually, oh, and of course, in the new Kullervo book. Yeah. Just go ahead.
It's not out in America yet.
No, it's not out in America yet. It won't be out until the spring in America. Yeah. No.
Really know that?
Yeah. No, sadly, we just have to wait. They just make the colonists wait for a while. It's fine. It's fine. I'm used to it. Another question. This is from Lancelot Schobert, who says he is. It's a very poetical name, right? He says he's a former copywriter and a current poet, and he's interested in the intersection between conlang and semiotics. And he's wondering. He says, "Do you think that the discipline of language creation is valuable for redirecting the current trajectory of a language like English. He says he's asking, particularly because English, of course, is a very non-restrictive language that permits all manner of words, within its borders. And, he feels that, in English, unlike other languages like French or Icelandic, where, there's sort of one particular set of gatekeepers for the language. With English, it seems that it's mostly copywriters and admin who are and sort of I would add social media and things like that, which really changed the language. Do you think? But so again, his question: do you think that the discipline of language invention could really inform sort of the direction that English goes?
Well, it's interesting. There's several instances, and we'll talk about this more in the course, especially in the 19th century, where people tried to purify English and bring it back to its kind of Anglo-Saxon roots. There was a guy named Edward Molay who created a version of English that only used Anglo-Saxon words. So, things like speechcraft and stuff like that, to kind of get rid of all the kind of the foreign read French stuff that had gone into English. And I think that's an interesting one. If we were to take out all the jargon, if we were to create an invented language that brought English back and took all the jargon and all the slang out and everything, what would it look like? So there were those movements in the 19th century to kind of restore English. Yes, I think that's an interesting one. There's some interesting stuff in Secret Vice about that. That's all I'll say.
Excellent. So many teasers. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I know. It's gonna be. I want those people there at midnight lining up.
That's right.
Harry Potter.
Absolutely. It'd be just like Harry Potter. It'd be exactly that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Matthew Wicker asks, what fields of scholarship, of Tolkien scholarship, do you think are particularly ripe for further study right now? Do you have any sense of sort of for people who are kind of interested in moving on? Anything you would suggest?
Well, there's a lot more work to be done on the languages, that's for sure. I mean, again, we're just now, thanks to Elf, the Elvis, we're getting. This whole volume that's just come out is rich with all kinds of stuff about verbs and things like that. So I think there's a lot more that can be done on taking the languages seriously in terms of research. Another area that at Kalamazoo this year, Kalamazoo is the big International Medieval Congress that I've been very lucky to go to twice now and give papers at. And one area that seems to be coming out more and more is Tolkien and Chaucer. Because Tolkien did some amazing, he did the Reeves Tale talk and everything, but he also worked on an edition of Chaucer that he didn't complete. But he did a lot of work on Chaucer, and I think there's definitely more work to be done there. Also, this year we started at Leeds, at the Medieval Conference at Leeds, a whole panel on Tolkien and Celticism. And Chris Swank, for example, did an amazing paper on the Irish sources in Roverandom, the Imrama, the kind of the Irish journey sources, and looking at Celtic, looking at Welsh, looking at Irish, looking at Breton. I think that Tolkien was very influenced by. I think is another area of scholarship that more work needs to be done in.
Based on her Mythgard thesis, I believe, that paper by Chris Swank. Yeah. No, great. Yeah, no, she does such great work. Cool. Yeah, no, there's so much stuff. And to bring that question back around a little bit more personally, Sarah Brown, who wanted to make sure to congratulate you, by the way, on the production of your first book here, is asking what's next for you. Do you have plans for your next project now that this one is on the way out?
Well, you can't see it because it's on my wall, but a very esteemed colleague in the Tolkien group, I was staying at his house at Kalamazoo, and I went to the bathroom and I saw all these little yellow stickies on his wall, and I thought, well, what are those? And those are all his projects. So what I've done is modeled that, and I've got about 9 stickies on my wall right now. And they include finishing up an article that I've been working on for Tolkien Studies that I want to submit based on one of my Kalamazoo papers. I've also just completed a draft of a book review for the Blackwell, a companion to this book, the companion to J.R.R. Tolkien, which is a fantastic volume, which, by the way, has a brilliant paper in it on poetry by Corey Olsen himself, and no one could do poetry like Corey Olsen. So I just reviewed that. And then I've got another language project that I'm thinking about, and then finally it's taking this monster, the thesis, and turning it into a monograph. And that is going to be the next year of my life, basically. Because I think there's some really good stuff in here that can be turned into a monograph. So I'll be going back to this after I finish one of the project and on that. But I'd love to get an article into Tolkien studies too, and I think this one I gave on Kalamazoo is a good one.
It's so great,
and that should keep me busy for a while.
Yeah, I should probably keep you off the streets and out of the pool halls for a little while anyway. But very good, very good. And I think there is so much interesting work to be done on the languages. And I say this as someone. I mean, I've never been a language aficionado myself. I was never one of the, as much as I've been a devoted Tolkien fan my whole life, I never learned to write in Tengwar. I never really studied the languages. That was never really where my love was with Tolkien. It was just, reading the stories and thinking about the stories. But there is so much to learn, not just about the, and I think that sometimes people kind of think about Tolkien's languages in that way, right? Like that's kind of interesting if you're into that kind of thing, right? If you're like a language kind of person. But I just like Tolkien's stories, and so I don't really go there. But I think there is it is such a rich field to try to understand the development of Tolkien's ideas. I mean, like, Andy, I remember a conversation that you and I had a while back spurred by something I think that came up in the very first Mythgard class ever, which you were attending, about Yeah, exactly. About some of the word lists, right? Some of the early word lists. In particular, you were drawing my attention to the fact that in those early word lists, Tolkien listed all of these Elvish words for Christian ideas, right? So there's like the Elvish words for like monastery and all these Christian theological terms. And again, the point that I would make there is, you can see when you study not only the development of the language over time, but the development of the vocabulary and Tolkien's working through it. There is so much story there. There's so much richness there. I mean, the very presence of those words gives a kind of depth to some of the things that you can read, like Christopher Tolkien conjecturing about, for instance, in his commentaries on the Book of Lost Tales stuff, right? Especially when we're coming towards the end of the Lost Tales, which Tolkien didn't write out, and Christopher Tolkien is doing all of that, sort of synthesizing and conjecturing. Here are these notes and scraps that we have, and this is kind of the direction he was thinking, and this is what we can. There's so much that you can see going on. All these stories that are forming themselves in Tolkien's head that we can put together just by looking at the language and the development of the language and the vocabularies. There's so much there. So I definitely would encourage people to be thinking more about that's one of the things that I personally would love to see more of, is sort of thinking about Tolkien talked about the roots of his stories being in the languages, and seeing more people taking that stuff and working with that.
Well, John Garth called the Quenya Lexicon a writer's notebook, and I think he was working out stories. And Demetra, remember in one of her early articles, talks about a flower fairy and gives it a name. He says flower fairy that sat on a pad or something, that never appeared in the Book of Lost Tales. But this is what mythology is language, language is mythology, which is Verlin Flieger's favorite bumper sticker, and I agree, is connected, because to get a full view of Tolkien's mythology, it's not just about reading the narrative, it's reading in the language stuff. And if you go through the Quenya Lexicon, which is in Parma, Elder Lambaran 12, and you just read it, and just read the names, and look at the little stories, the mini stories he's constructing. There's the little girl who, when she cries, flowers spring up from her feet, Niliki. I mean, who is that? There's hints of it in the Book of Lost Tales. So I think Tolkien was playing with that idea. He was playing with creating those little mini stories in both the language stuff and the other area, and this is another area that I think is very interesting, and I explored in the thesis a bit, is the early visuals. He's visualizing this mythology. If you look at the Shores of Faery that he painted in May of 1915, and then he wrote the poem, which is really, the Shores of Faery is really the birth of the mythology, I think, because it's the first time we get invented names, and that's July 1915.
Right.
He's visualized it, and then he writes the poem about it. And then he creates Eldamar, Valinor, things like that.
Yes.
He's using all these different paratextual layers to create this world, basically. I would just say take the Quenya lexicon, the Gnomish lexicon, even the etymologies at the back of the Lost Road, and read through them. And you will find little lost stories that did not appear in the narrative.
Yeah. So cool. So cool. So much stuff to talk about there. Well, thanks, Andy, and thanks again for teaching the class with us in the spring. This is going to be so much fun, not just to be learning more about Tolkien's invented languages, but to be thinking about invented languages in this sort of broader perspective and comparing what Tolkien did to some other examples. I think it's going to be a really fascinating study of a kind of sort of fantasy creation and fantasy creativity, which I think is too little thought about, and I think will be really fascinating to study. So thanks for that. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I promised we would do another giveaway. I want to give away another set of Tolkien's books to enrich the study of another one of our attendees. And the winner of our second drawing is Franny Moore-Kyle, a longtime Mythgard student. Good to see you here today, Franny. Congratulations. Again, send me an email with your mailing address and which of those sets of books you want: the History of the Lord of the Rings, the Fantasy Tales box set, or the History of Middle-earth box set of volumes 1 through 5. And we would be happy to send one of those sets to you. So let me just end with a couple announcements. Next week we're having, in addition to our regular schedule of things, as for instance, I'm going to be doing my third session on the Mythgard Academy class where we're discussing Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. That's going to be happening tomorrow. No. Tonight. Yeah, it's going to be happening in like 4 hours. So, I should probably keep track of time. So I hope that you'll be able to join me for that. Next week, we are going to do our next special event is going to be featuring one of the new sort of projects and programs that we've begun running this past year, which I've been having so much fun doing, and that's our Lord of the Rings Online project. What we're going to be doing next
You are amazing, Lord of the Rings.
Thanks.
Sorry. I watched a bit of you in Lord of the Rings, and it is priceless, because I love the way you interact with the things like, I got to collect goblin hatchets? What's that all about? I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah, it's so much fun to think.
I was laughing out loud.
I find the world of the Lord of the Rings Online, sometimes bizarre, but always really interesting. I have never explored, in any medium, any kind of Tolkien adaptation that I find more consistently interesting and thoughtful than the Lord of the Rings Online. I've become a big fan of the kind of intellectual work they have done. Even though there are lots of really quirky video game-ish things, which I sometimes find kind of funny. I do nevertheless really, really like what they've done, even though I don't always agree with every adaptation choice they make, of course, but I always find them interesting. And so what we're doing next Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, after the Star Wars class, we're going to do. So I'm going to do this special. I'm going to be streaming it so that you can watch it live, and we'll of course be posting recordings as well. You can watch it live without having to enter the game. So if you have never played Lord of the Rings Online before, if you're not a video game person, you can still kind of see this, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be kind of taking my main character, whose name is Wigand. He's a guardian, and Wigand in Anglo-Saxon just means warrior. I thought naming him warrior in Anglo-Saxon would be like a kind of a Tolkien thing to do, right? How like Edoras' buildings and Medusel means mead hall in Anglo-Saxon. He loves to do that. So I'm like, hey, a very Tolkien name. I'll just name my warrior. Anyway, so Wigand is going to bounce around to a bunch of sort of famous sites in Middle-earth, places which a lot of, most of the players of the game will be familiar with, but a really great chance to sort of see a glimpse of the kind of adaptation and thinking that they're doing. And I'm gonna be going around and doing some sort of careful examination of these sites and looking at the kinds of things that they're doing and how they've adapted the story. So we're going to see, a Hobbiton in Bag End. We're going to see, I think we're going to do the Prancing Pony. We'll see the Stone Trolls. We'll see the shipwreck where King Arvedui was wrecked up in the north. We'll go to lots of different sites, and it'll be a lot of fun. So that's next Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And
might stay up.
Yeah, exactly. Got to get your double espresso back out again. Yeah, exactly. And just to remind you, please do consider supporting our fundraising campaign. We have been, as I have been very, very overwhelmed by the generosity of our listeners in the past, and we really continue to rely on donations for the future. So please do consider supporting this during this course of this whole month here. I also wanted to remember to announce, sort of on Sorina's behalf, Sorina, who is here with us at the beginning, has been the primary force behind this. This has been such great fun. Serena mentioned it at the beginning. The Almost an Inkling creative writing contest, the flash fiction contest, which has been going on this week. So that's been, I've been delighted to see the entries there. We had dozens and dozens of entries last week. Yeah, exactly. So please do consider submitting for this for our creative writing contest that's going on this week, and we look forward to seeing you at other events this week. And thanks again for joining us, Andy.
Thank you very much. And just to say to everyone out there, what Mythgard and what Signum provides is an incredible opportunity for exploration, discovery, and I'm sure Corey has lots of ideas for the future, and your support will make that happen and bring people like Corey and Tom Shippey and Verlin Flieger into your living room. And what better way to study Tolkien? So please support us as much as you can, and thanks very much.
Yes, thanks again. Well, thanks everybody, and we will see you around soon. Bye now.